I'm from Indonesia, which is 18.5 hour flight from California. So we really wanted to share about the startup that we've been building for the last 5 months, and are really looking forward to learn and to have sharings with all the more expert startups and all the legal community back in CodeX. So in short, Gistika is we want to call it a friendly legal service, an online marketplace that they want to give friendlier legal service to Indonesian community in a way that our vision is to basically equalize and to alleviate legal access disparity in the country. So let me start off a bit with the context of Indonesia. So a lot of people nowadays, they learn about India, they know about China, and of course about the United States, but the world is not just there. So Indonesia, which is 18.5 hour flight from California, is the new emerging economic superpower. In a study in PricewaterhouseCoopers, it said that our country would be the fourth largest economy in the world in 2050, just one spot under the United States. But in all this growth and all this potential to be better in terms of economy, a lot of things in the country, especially the legal literacy and legal infrastructure, is still in its infancy. I'm sure that everybody here is aware of the World Justice Project, that they do this annual rule of law index on countries. Despite of the future and the potential of being number 4 in terms of economy, in terms of law index, our country is still number 63 right now. So there are three main problems, three main key issues that is hindering this. The first one is that people in Indonesia, what we experience here in our country, we really have legal as a thing that we want to push aside every day in our lives because it is something that we consider taboo. Our parents, the people around us always said that you really want to stay away from the police, from the court, things like that. And then when the storm hits you, when legal issues comes to your doorstep, you really don't have any idea. You really don't know what to do. And secondly, in terms of the legal service providers, Indonesian lawyers, the image that they're trying to build and the perception that have been built in the public is that they're Rockefellers, they're high-class high rollers that have really expensive lifestyle, and then intuitively the public, the people are quite intimidated by them, and so they feel that every time they have legal issues, the cost would be very big. There's a very famous saying in Indonesia: when you lose a sheep and you go to a lawyer, then the cost would be a cow. So that's another barrier. And number 3, you may also learn a lot. There's an article back in 2017 in New York Times. It is the headline goes, in one day, one is cleared and one is convicted, a sign of a really troubling court order in Indonesia. So it is shown that the people, especially also the international society, doesn't really trust that the court system can deliver a just judgment. I put also a few surveys, a few data that shows deeper understanding on that. You can see that a survey done on the public saying, if you're asked if you know the procedure for bringing a problem into general court, only 25% of Indonesians know what to do. And I put here just a visualization of a very top lawyer, an Instagram account. he does posts every day, sharing and sharing his extraordinary lifestyle, and it's might find that inappropriate, and it's a snippet of an article that I was mentioning. And with that, basically what Justica is trying to do is to alleviate these barriers with our product, because we really want to know and really want to help these Indonesians to really start and to feel that they can do just a thing to keep the legal scale into the right balance. And with that, I would switch to my partner here, Hafiz, to explain about the product.
Okay, hello everyone.
Hi.
Thank you for having us today here. So I'm gonna presenting the landscape landing page of Justica. Can you see the screen sharing? Okay, so the landing page is in Indonesia, but I will walk you through the landing page. So basically the product we are creating compared to many march on when the technology industry meet legal industry, we see that the spirit is how to create a very advanced technology to create many new value that maybe for that unimaginable, like so many machine learning approach and etc. What we are building here is basically a very simple booking of consultation, but the background of it's a very customer-driven focus, how to help people to get the opportunity to legal service. So given that the landscape is very challenging, the fear and the unfamiliarity that people feels when it comes to legal context make the huge gap in the process of getting legal services. So what we are trying to do is to create better opportunity for them to get legal services. So it's their unfamiliarity and their tendency to avoid illegal efforts make the process and the result more unfair, because it's the tendency of giving up of our people here. So the campaign we launched about that is in Indonesia named Tanya Aja Dulu, means that at least ask for your condition first. That's why the first product we launch is the call for advice, call for legal advice. This say that 300 legal problems has been consulted to Justica and get the strategy out of it. So we are try to push people to ask at least first about their condition, so they can get better opportunity and strategy with their condition. So not only that, we are trying to give them many testimonials here and make them easy to imagine what legal service they can get when they get advice.
Hafiz, can I just interrupt you for a second? So I should have mentioned that at the beginning. We actually have 3 presenters today and we only have 1 hour. So I want to give everyone about 20 minutes for their presentation, including Q&A. So we have about 5 more minutes or so. I want to make sure that you cover the things that you wanted to cover, and then also give some time to people to ask questions.
Okay. So moving forward, when people can access is try to consult, means that we encourage them to get the legal advice. They will be presented the category of their problem. A very layman language is very easy to choose which problem they have, and then after that this is serves to match them with appropriate lawyer, and the cost is very upfront, makes the imagination of the high expensive legal services clear upfront. It's very affordable, and the scope is very clear, so the price barrier will be clear through this. And lawyer, we create a limited list of lawyers they can choose to ask about their problem. We make this very limited, match with their category of problems, and we don't want to put any other confusion and effort for them, make them drop off, because the condition of customer is very confused and avoid any legal context. We make this very easy to choose, and with the limited options, so it's very easy to choose one of them. And the other interesting part here is the schedule of the lawyer. So because of the court process and legal process in Indonesia is still inefficient in many places, the lawyer, she is a very high top tier lawyer in Indonesian capital city. The cost is very high, but we provide consultation with her until 1/8 of her cost. Why? Because we access her untapped slot of time when she should be waiting for the court process, the negotiation in institution, the very long process that makes them makes her idle for a moment. So she open the job and receive call for consultation. So after that, it's about payment. So we make also the payment so straightforward with the cost very clear up front to make the booking of the consultation happen rightly at the moment, and makes the doubt and the confusion. We don't want to allow that to make them drop off again. So that's maybe the sharing of the product, the battle of thought in the customer's head. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So what is the market response to your platform? I mean, did you already roll it out, and is it easy to get lawyers to use it? Is it easy to get consumers to be comfortable to find lawyers through the website? Can you share some stats about user adoption?
We get a very positive feedback from the customer. So we have launched this about in 3 months, and we got many customers that the satisfaction and retention is very high, and learning from their case is mostly the case they consult with is the complex case that they delay so long to deal with until this like a very new stream to give them opportunity to get the advice and strategy.
And
so
are you the first marketplace for lawyers in Indonesia, or are there others too?
So there are a few others, but others are inactive. So you can download the app and you can see the website, but you cannot really log in, and you cannot others have different bidding schemes. They have bidding schemes, but it's not really inactive.
And are you making money through advertising or through referral fees?
We're making through referral fees.
Oh, so you can do that in it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
right.
Yeah, that's
interesting.
What's your strategy? What's your strategy for dealing with the many languages in Indonesia? If a tribe wanted to bring a lawsuit against a logging company from a different language, what would your approach be through your website? And would machine translation be part of that?
So right now we are providing one language. Fortunately, Indonesian language is a standard that all the tribes here can speak with.
So basically in Indonesia, although the tribe and the language is diverse, but the application and the usage of the national language, which is Indonesian language, in which, because we're based on civil law, all the regulations are also in Indonesian language, and so the language that we're using in Indonesian are quite applicative, regardless of the tribe language.
Mm-hmm.
But
do you have some
really
information? Oh, sorry.
Insight. Yeah.
Can you share some information about what kind of cases people look for help for through your platform?
Yeah. So right now we have about 100 people viewing in on the website, because we're under Hukum Online Group, which is the largest and the only legal media company in the country. So we basically have the advantage of tapping towards their audience, and mostly the number one ranked cases are family law, and secondly is about debt collection. Family law, divorce, wills,
and the next is about the small business disputes, and also the land legal problem in villages. It appears many times in our platform as a customers. So we are seeing that although the marketplace model is very common in many areas of service like e-commerce and etc. in Indonesia, so we are seeing the battle is not about not only providing access to lawyers. It's more the battle of how to bring those tend to giving up people into more encourage people to seek and fight for their condition.
Okay, so we have maybe time for just one more question. Does anyone online have a question for Melvin and Hasif?
If not, I'm going to jump in. It's Bruce Cahan. We're part of a group to retrofit slums in Indonesia with clean water. And I wonder whether your platform would also support requiring, let's say, regulatory action to enforce environmental or other laws, public health laws. Is that something that you would have lawyers? We have pro bono lawyers. Would lawyers actually volunteer to enforce those rights? And could people find those lawyers through your platform?
Thank you so much for the question. There's a really good, and it's really exciting to find people also working towards the same vision in the country. So we are now trying and wanting also to develop the pro bono channel. So we talked to a few government officials, to the KSP, the presidential office. One of the main issue that we're having is that filtering and the operational issues on how we can differentiate people that has the right to have free legal aid, and also the ones that are not. And also, secondly, since the currency for lawyers in Indonesia to serve pro bono hours is not really that magnificent, and so we're also lobbying with government officials to also provide some kind of an award. So the answer to your question is basically yes, it's something that we're really looking into the future. When the platform is has enough volume, and we want to also provide for the lawyers in the platform to give pro bono channels, especially in remote areas.
Yeah, I think part of getting legal service to the poor is making sure the government services will show up when they're supposed to.
Yes, yes.
And I think you have to talk to your Supreme Court to get the judges to tell the lawyers to pro bono.
Yeah, yeah, that's also one of the main issue. Maybe we can also talk further. I could really use and learn from you and your experiencing in the initiative.
Happy to do it afterward.
Yeah, if you want to type your email addresses into the chat, that way people can be in touch. That'd be great.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, good luck with your next steps. And please keep us posted. What time is it over there now, by the way?
It's 3:30 a.m. in the morning.
Oh my God! Well, thank you so much for
Thank
staying
you.
up.
Yeah, please click. Thank you, and please click on share on your screen.
All right. Thank you
Yeah.
again.
Sure.
for
Thank
joining
you
us.
so much.
All right. So then let's turn it over to
Thank
Aaron.
you so much.
Thanks again.
Hey everyone, just waiting to share my screen and then I'll
Yep.
let go. All right,
There you are.
that's me. Well, thanks Roland for inviting me, and it's great again to engage with.
Oh, you're on mute now. We can't hear you anymore.
Yeah, what happened?
Wait a second. Wait. Did we mute him?
No.
Aaron, we can't hear you.
And I don't think he can see us.
Oh, really?
I'm not
Oh,
sure
because it's
he's
looking
not
at the
responding.
screen.
Do the chat. Stop.
But he's still talking.
The slides have captions. Yeah, we're fine.
Did we potentially accidentally mute, like the computer?
No. I will mute it and unmute it. And now we will have to
Wait.
call our team.
There we go. Hey,
Can you hear me?
now we
Now
can
we
hear you.
can.
Yeah.
I think my
Just
AirPods.
now. Please start again.
Hold on. Yeah.
What
Sorry.
happened?
My AirPods kicked out. I don't know why. But if you can hear me, okay, I'll start from here. So just I was giving my background. I don't know where I kicked out. I'm a professor in law school. Hold on.
Now we can hear you.
Okay, let me just take my AirPods off. Apple is failing me. So I'm a professor at Cardozo Law School. I had a background in law and technology. Before joining Cardozo's faculty, I started and sold a company to the for-profit sister project of Wikipedia called Wikia, where I helped scale that up to be the 15th or so largest site on the planet. Played a small role helping to launch the Ethereum network. I also helped Joe Lubin, one of the co-founders of Ethereum, set up Consensus, which is now the largest blockchain technology company in the world with about 1,200 people globally. I just published a book with a co-author called Blockchain and the Law, The Rule of Code.
Great book, by the way. I just bought it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, my research is focused in on topics.
He didn't pay me for that.
Yeah, that are near and dear to CodeX's heart, which is this idea of a smart contract. And really the manifestation of some of these ideas is this project OpenLaw, which I'm building with about 20 other people. And it's a joint venture along with Consensus. And I think, hopefully in the next couple minutes, I can just kind of cut through a lot of the hype related to blockchains. I know that I'm sure you've heard a lot about it. But fundamentally what we're trying to build with OpenLaw is an agreement layer for blockchain technology. What we enable folks to do is to automate and create and manage legal agreements and transfer blockchain-based assets in a legally enforceable way. I think, really cutting through this hype, what blockchains do really well is they're a way to keeping track of who owns what at what point in time, and also keeping track of other bits of information. So we've seen that really manifest in with virtual currencies like Bitcoin and Ether. We've seen the explosion of the sale and transfer of tokens over the past year. And the hypothesis, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, is that over time, blockchains will manage more and more assets. And really the misnomer, and this is something that has been discussed within the CodeX, is what is this idea of a smart contract? Well, fundamentally, really what it does is transfer these assets. So much the same way that we've turned communications into email, smart contracts effectively turn assets into a similar information good. We can now transfer that across the globe and structure the transfer of those assets, in about 15 seconds on Ethereum, and over time that's kicking down. And really, when what we're building on top of a blockchain, and there's lots of additional solutions and middleware that's being built on top, is a solution that really streamlines the operation of the legal industry. So we've rolled together kind of the first, what I would call the first generation of legal technology, and incorporated some of the unique features of a blockchain to enable robust document automation, contract management, electronic signatures, and also now we can incorporate smart contracts to do things like automated compliance and transfer blockchain-based assets. So if you want to play around with this $200 billion token ecosystem in a legally enforceable way, we now have the tools to do that. And in many ways, we've learned over the past couple of years that smart contracts in and of themselves have limitations. So if you engage in a transaction on a blockchain, there's privacy concerns. There's issues related to the self-execution of smart contracts. So the smart contracts kind of change the default rules of performance, where performance occurs unless somebody tells it not to. We built tools that have solved that. We also know that there's limitations of code, something that I know many folks here have thought about. You can't represent every single contractual provision into a code-based arrangement outside of like a pointer of some sort. So through our domain-specific markup language, we've been able to kind of solve some of those issues. And then the last one is usability. It's very difficult still to interact with the blockchain. We solve that in many ways through the use of public and private APIs. And really, just to kind of unpack what we built this top-of-the-line domain-specific markup language that enables folks to basically automate any legal agreement, identify all the key variables, and embed within it the logic that lawyers work through with their clients. We've also enabled folks to kind of string that together, not just from one agreement, but into an entire set of agreements or deal. And we can even bring it down to the clause level. We use a blockchain to and a layer 2 solution that we built, something we call the OpenLaw virtual machine, to evidence a state of agreement and all the relevant electronic signatures on the Ethereum blockchain. So by doing that and through that architecture, we actually enable and preserve privacy of the contracting parties, but also enable folks to interact with this dynamic blockchain-based system. So once we have evidence of the fact that an agreement has been executed and cryptographically can prove that it's been signed, then we can trigger a smart contract to move around the assets in a pretty nice way. We baked into that, and through this architecture, we can actually halt and control some of the smart contract functionality, which opens up avenues for blockchain-based arbitration systems, which I'll touch upon in a little bit, along with making sure that some of these transfers are in alignment with existing U.S. law, at least. And all of this is serviceable through an API. We're actually open sourcing and releasing that tomorrow as part of an announcement at DevCon, which is a big Ethereum-based conference. And really, just to kind of synthesize this all, and this is what we're seeing on the ground, what's emerging is a blockchain-based stack. So, whether or not it's Ethereum at the base, it doesn't really matter. But these blockchains are going to be managing more and more assets over the years. And we're seeing core functions that have existed effectively since the dawn of man that are now getting translated increasingly into blockchain-based ecosystems. So that includes things like custody and exchange, or keeping assets safe and providing marketplaces for it. Questions related to identity and attestation, proving that the party wants to engage in a transaction or transfer an asset. And the core piece, and I think this is the most exciting for the legal industry, is our legal protocol. And this combination, this stack that's being built is going to support a range of applications and hopefully a transformation of many of the commercial activities that we do today. Let's take the next slide. So another couple things that we have built. So what we're building effectively as the first application on our protocol is something you can think of as a combination of Wikipedia and GitHub. We have a public repository of agreements that we're building. We're in the process of converting tens of thousands of agreements using basic machine learning and natural language processing techniques, basically using the publicly available contracts that are attached to SEC filings. I'll show you what that looks like. So we're making those all blockchain compatible. Those agreements can be basically ported into a private instance or a private environment where businesses or other folks can play around with it and or build applications on top of it. We have baked into the process already contract management tools. So using a blockchain to keep track of the life cycle of an agreement makes it kind of a natural place to begin to keep track of the life cycle of all commercial activity that can occur on our protocol. So we provide that, and it's all accessible through APIs, so it can get ingested and inputted into any system. And the idea here is that we can really be the pipes and have a kind of a flowering of applications and services that are built on top of the protocol. The other thing that we can do is we can start coding compliance, and I'll show you a couple instances of that. So we can begin to embed into the agreement certain basic features that may be useful for compliance purposes. We've demonstrated this in a couple instances. We've put into a basic tax compliance for purposes of a payroll processor, showing how you can enforce that with a smart contract. We also, just a couple days ago, released a tool that enables folks to fractionalize ownership of art and represent that on a blockchain and embed within it certain royalty transfer requirements that are mandated in Europe. So we've done quite a bit of work over the past couple months just to kind of show the power of the platform. So one is, and just to kind of show this out in a little bit more detail, we took a standard employee offer letter, and we marked it up using our markup language. We transformed several provisions within the agreement into a smart contract. And once it was signed by all the relevant parties, the parties could get paid in real time. By transferring assets into something akin to email, that you can move them around seamlessly. So instead of getting paid every 2 weeks, we showed how somebody can get paid every minute. Not just get paid every minute, by embedding and modeling out the U.S. tax, or portions of the U.S. tax code as smart contracts. The government can collect taxes in real time, and they can also make sure that compliance has been achieved just by checking the fact that the smart contract was being executed instead of doing an extensive auditing process. Like I mentioned before, we've also shown how you can use certain token standards that are emerging on the Ethereum blockchain to represent ownership interest in digital artwork, fractionalize that ownership, and actually tokenize or represent licenses or non-exclusive licenses to that artwork, and transfer that via a legally enforceable agreement. We've just released also kind of a sketch out of what a blockchain-based arbitration would look like. So an agreement with a smart contract that's embedded that enables parties to basically trigger an online dispute resolution proceeding that's managed via smart contract. We worked with a law firm down in Australia called Coors to model out the sale and representation of real property on a blockchain. So we modeled out a sale of land contract, represented that in our system, had a buyer put down a deposit into a virtual escrow account that was maintained by a smart contract, lender provide a loan, have that automatically transferred to the seller once it was cryptographically proven, and then update a blockchain-based land registry. So we showed the Australian government effectively how we can narrow the settlement time for these types of transactions down from 30 days to about 10 seconds if everybody was in synchronization. We've also started tracking some lending-related use cases and just showed how revolving lines of credit and other systems can actually use management using this technology. And lots of really interesting things. We've announced a public partnership with Rockefeller, which is going to be using our tools in order to bring some of this technology to the masses. Behind the scenes, we've been partnering with a number of governments, trade associations, and other folks to really continue this journey. So lots of exciting things. I don't know how much time I have left. I don't see my clock.
About 3 minutes or so, but yeah. So do you want to open it up to questions or?
Yeah, sure. And this is all there. You can go to openlaw.io. We have extensive documentation. I'm going to show that on my screen. I think you can still see it. Extensive documentation goes into language, we also have a review tool. We basically, I was going to show you guys how we're ingesting agreements. So kind of that process. Yeah.
It's really amazing. It's great to see. I mean, for a long time it was a sort of interesting theoretical question, like how can you use the blockchain in different legal contexts? But I think you're offering these very concrete examples. Also examples where you can see that the blockchain actually has to add something over a normal database approach for digital signatures. I think is very helpful to make it more tangible, more concrete. But I'm sure there's lots of questions. Do you folks have any questions? I think
I have a question.
OMara has a question.
So going back to your tax compliance case, how do you deal with ambiguity in the law or even changes in the law? For example, the W-2 contractor situation where they might have agreed to a certain set of terms and arrangements. The IRS comes out with additional guidance saying that previous interpretation of the law is incorrect, and they're going to engage in enforcement action, and all of a sudden you have all these contracts and agreements that are no longer valid or basically in violation. And I guess how do you deal with that ambiguity and then go back to sort of changes in the law?
Yes, that's a great question. I think the part is really gets at the limitations of coding certain provisions. I think you're not going to code every single provision of the law, but particularly with tax compliance, since it's fairly formulaic and objectively verifiable, it's pretty ripe to be transformed into code. So that's really what it's focused in on, right? There's certain brackets where people have to pay a certain rate, and that's pretty easy to render down into something that a code-based system can deal with. If there is ambiguity in the law, it's probably not going to be something that's going to be transformed into a smart contract-based system anytime soon. But there are many areas where there are objectively verifiable bright line tests, bright line amounts that actually can be useful in this context. So we're not claiming that this is a solution for everything, but we think it's useful, and particularly in the tax and tax compliance purposes. With regard to updates in the law, listen, we're still in the proof of concept phase. We're not claiming that we have all the answers, but for certain areas, there's not as much in terms of updates. And I think that this could prove useful. And I imagine that given our ability to halt the execution of these smart contracts, you could basically reopen the agreement and embed a new reference to a contract, and you're off to the races. I imagine over time, what we'd like to kind of build towards is like a release, just like software, where you could basically update that provision, and every agreement that was referencing that would just get updated equally. You get propagated across a range of agreements.
Or maybe Congress needs to publish the laws on the blockchain in the first place,
Yeah.
and then it would automatically update all the smart contracts accordingly.
I don't know. I mean, I know that sounds very future forward, but you could imagine such a system in 20 plus years.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it really is just an object to some sort of blockchain-based reference, so I don't see why that would be too complex in theory.
Right.
So Aaron, it's Bruce Cahan. Hey, this is great work. Are you able to trace a scenario where the banks, through let's say the R3 or whatever, are able to mock up a change in, let's say, AML or KYC law, and to include a different, I don't know, group, and that it just automatically sweeps the PII data, the personal information that the bank holds, to see if the new law is complied with? I mean, it doesn't have to be that hypothetical, but any such hypothetical where you've got this iterative thing going on.
Yeah, I think the way I would probably think about that is feeding in that data through an oracle. If that's going to dynamically change, basically the trusted data to feed that into a blockchain-based system. So let's say a third-party service emerged that did those AML Know Your Customer checks. They could basically certify or issue some sort of blockchain-based attestation that this person has satisfied their checks. And then that can be inputted into the smart contract to move forward with the performance obligation of some sort. And therefore, if dynamically changing list in some capacity, you would have that flexibility while also gaining certainty at the agreement level that only lawful parties that are authorized under law to engage in a certain transaction are able to do so.
But the certification could also capture the status of the law at that moment.
It definitely could, yeah. I mean, I think there's lots of areas to explore here. It potentially could. It's not something that I've thought as deeply as you may have at this point, though.
Okay, we should talk.
Yeah, I love.
Thank you for sharing that vision about imagining a world in which all can participate in a just system. And I was wondering whether you have any initiatives yet to localize in other languages, so many of those people in the world don't necessarily do their contracts in English.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the goal. So we architected the system to be language agnostic. So a lot like Wikipedia, we barely started to get to translate it. So the system is ready for it. It's really just labor so that we can get localized translations. And then just doing a couple additions on the back end just to make sure that we could accommodate different translations. It's like an IAT and file that we need to create and embed in various different places on the site. Yeah, but that's the idea, right? We're starting here because English is a popular language, but our plan is to have this accessible in any language, anywhere where people want.
Okay. Aaron, just a final question. So is OpenLaw, is it a company or is it a nonprofit?
It's a company. Yeah. So it's a joint venture between me, David Roon, who is one of the co-founder of OpenLaw. He contributed to the Ethereum J client. So, on the blockchain side, we're pretty rock solid in consensus. You curious about the business model? We're going to go to business.
Yeah, that would have been my next question. Like, how do you guys make money?
Yeah, so the model is similar to GitHub, right? So GitHub has a public repository where people can access information, but if you want to create a private version for yourself, and we know that lawyers pride themselves and like privacy and like to fiddle around with agreements, they'll be able to do so. So we started to build some basic tools where you can pull agreements from the public site into a private repository, where you can upload it to that private repository. We plan on charging for that, along with the assistance when you execute a smart contract through our system. And so we charge a multiple on top of that. So it's a SaaS model with like a per seat licensing.
Got it. All right. Well, all right, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. This is very cool, very interesting.
Aaron, do you want to type your email into the chat box and then people can be in touch?
Yep, absolutely. I'll stop sharing and do that right now. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again. And then let's turn it over to OMara. Let's see, is this?
His Harvard Law talk with Primavera de Filippi was great. It was really interesting. Worth checking out.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess I'll go ahead and get started. So my company is Nika Builder. I'm a lawyer. I went to Cornell for law school, then practiced law at a couple of different firms in Chicago and in Texas before working in the federal government for a little bit. But at the entire time I was doing that, I had this idea of how do you solve this problem I'd run across, which is how do you create a custom Islamic marriage agreement? And to give you some context, within sort of the Muslim framework, marriage is an agreement and it's a contract. And this contract is negotiable. It's not just a sacrament or a ritual. These are actual obligations, responsibilities that both parties have. Now, when people typically get married, Muslim couples get married, they tend to use a standard form from a local mosque. It's very limited. It tends to say A marries B, B marries A, some pretty language, and maybe a bridal gift amount of some nominal amount or to a large amount. That tends to be it. But it can be a lot more than that. And I was talking to a number of friends and family members who were getting married, and I would ask them, did you negotiate this agreement? What did you negotiate? What did you do? And the answer I got was, oh, I know I could negotiate it. I didn't know what to negotiate for or how to negotiate, or like what I could ask for, what I shouldn't ask for. And also I didn't want to cause problems. I didn't want to be making all these demands on someone or them making demands on me. It was very uncomfortable. And so I came across this problem of like, okay, people know about this agreement. This is something that people can do and quite frankly have done in the past. And the question was, how do I solve this problem? And the original idea was to write a book. The problem is no one reads books. So the next idea was to basically make a website to help you do this. And so that's where Nika Builder came into being. And one of the reasons why it's hard to basically negotiate these agreements and why there's such demand for this is that one is legal systems have changed. So when you're looking at a very traditional nikah from medieval Egypt, a Maliki nikah, it makes sense for that era, but has very little bearing today. And I have seen these agreements, and they say things like, the wife has the right to return to her father's village, and the husband will provide 3 or 4 servants to support her in her household maintenance, which might have made sense in that economic and social reality. It does not really make sense today. 2, the legal systems themselves have changed, and more specifically, a lot of these agreements were created in a context where there was already understanding about property ownership and obligations of different parties. And so when you're negotiating these agreements, there's a framework that exists that people relied upon. that framework has changed. Family laws have changed over the last 500 to 1,000 years. And so when people's assumptions of, oh, like, do we have a joint marital estate or are they separate marital estates? And how is income treated? Is income joint or separate? These notions have all changed, and not just within the Western world, but across the whole world, which has led that to a lot of confusion about what exactly am I negotiating for? What exactly do these terms mean? What does it mean that I get a bridal gift? Is this bridal gift in lieu of a claim on the divorce settlement, or is this in addition? And so these are all sort of areas of problems and tensions people run into. They didn't know how to deal with them or how to solve them. And quite frankly, part of that confusion also, not just in the Western world, but also in the Muslim world, divorce rates are increasing, including the United States Muslim populations, including Saudi Arabia. I think at last I saw it was about hitting 25 to 30%. So this is a problem that's pretty global. And so that's the problem. And so the tool does a couple of things. One is it creates a set of options and a framework to plug and play terms. So you go category by category and just plug in the options that make the most sense for you. It helps lay out in very sort of detailed way who has responsibility for what and what expectations are regarding the marriage and how people want to live their lives together. And so one of the things that evolved out of this, and I didn't initially intend to do this, but people came back to me, was that this is basically great premarital counseling, that I get to sit here with my spouse or spouse-to-be, and I sit down and I'm going through all this stuff, and even if we don't put these terms in the agreement, forcing us to talk about it in a way that's in sort of a neutral framework without me demanding something or you demanding something of me, and like really think about this, because the options A, B, and C are different. A is significantly different than C. And you have to really think, like, what do I want? What does the other person want? Can we reconcile that? And so one of the things that's evolved is it's become very helpful as sort of this premarital counseling type tool, in addition to the actual agreement itself. And just to give you a sense of what it looks like, it's like, luckily you find someone, you have this sort of premarital counseling effect that's going on. And then there's this idea of, okay, we've done this, now we run into issues. Maybe we don't agree on, the financials or the family or whatever, and there's a space for guidance to come in, whether it be from family members, from, religious community leaders, from lawyers or counselors. There's that space there before you get to the final contract and then have a wedding and live happily ever after. So I want to give you sort of an example of what these things can look like. So the original ones that comes up, this is, sorry, I'm just loading up the screen share. So if you went to a mosque and you wanted a very standard agreement, this is what it would look like. It's fairly limited. It basically says this person marries this person. There's some pretty language. They've agreed to marry it. There's some witnesses, and there's some bridal gift or dowry type amount, which can range from very symbolic values to significant amounts. And that's about it. Now, what you can do, though, and what I want to show you is this is what it can be, is that you can have a number of different categories that address a number of different items. So just to sort of run through it a little bit, starting with personal status, this sort of sets the framework of who you are and what you're representing yourself to be. And this comes up, people sometimes will pretend to have not married someone beforehand, or they'll try to, people hide previous health status or mental health status issues or criminal background issues, and this sort of forces it on the paper and forces parties to come to say, okay, here's what I'm declaring about myself, here's what they're declaring about themselves, and there's not any ambiguity here. When we go to the marriage terms, there's a couple of core terms, and this is the framework. The mahar, which is the bridal gift, is fundamental to the Islamic marriage agreement. And there's different ways to think about this. And one of the ways I've done this here is to think about, okay, are we including gifts to the bride, say jewelry? Is that part of this mahar amount? Is it not? And sort of addressing those points up front. Other things that come up is wives, right? Within the Islamic marriage framework, husbands can have more than one wife. But you can contract that and say the husband forgoes to our traditional wives. And that is actually a fairly common term, that the husbands will be limited from having additional wives. Or another issue that comes up quite often when reconciling between sort of the Islamic marriage and the Western legal system is often Muslim couples will get married either in family homes or in hotels and won't necessarily go through an institution. And so this requires this marriages to be registered. This is particularly a problem in the UK, where for a number of years, the UK courts would not recognize a marriage unless it was registered. That's recently changed within the last month or so, but this became a huge issue where people would get married under in an Islamic marriage ceremony, but then the courts would not say you were married. It's also addressed things that are more typical Islamic law and governance, particularly the idea of talaq and the idea of divorce and how divorce occurs. The idea of there's this notion of a triple talaq and whether that's even permissible, but there are ways to limit that on the front end.
What is talaq? What is that?
It's this idea of, I don't know if you're familiar with this concept, there are people who say that if you say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you 3 times, you can get divorced that way.
I've heard of that.
Right, and so there's a question of whether that's actually even permissible, but some countries do recognize that, but you can contract that out. Right, and there's ways to grant rights in divorce and limit rights in divorce, including, for example, the right to delegation, that you can give the wife a similar right of the husband to divorce in addition to her own rights to divorce. And so there's ways to sort of address a number of very specifically Islamic legal framework concepts in this agreement. Then there's more typical stuff, such as spousal support, particularly if like one couple's working, another one's not, general sort of home issues. The one that's probably more unique is lifestyle, where you can address a number of personal behaviors, particularly even ones that are religiously oriented. And this is, people find this, even if they don't necessarily put all this in there, find it helpful to get on the same page about where you are and sort of your views and my views and how we want to think about these things. And a lot of these terms were developed in conjunction with family counselors and religious leaders about things that had come up and issues that had become conflicts. For example, pornography was an issue that was actually a significant issue that in marriages and in conflict. Similarly, another issue that comes up is marital conflict and the issue of divorce cooperation, particularly in this issue of where someone will get divorced in a civil proceeding but will not get religiously divorced. And then how do you reconcile that? And this sort of on the front end tries to address that by requiring the parties to cooperate to conclude that matter, or vice versa, where someone will get religiously divorced and not get civilly divorced. And so that's the core, and each party can choose their terms and can output a final document. And then to give you an example of what the document looks like, here's sort of a preamble of what's in one of these agreements, lays out the parties, and under each category you have all these terms that have been inputted based on your selection. And this goes through a number of different options. And one of the things that the website also allows you to do is to create your own term. So for example, if you do not like the terms I've created, you can enter your own term, and people often do that. They'll often tweak a term or adjust a term to their own preferences. They'll also, they have the option of not including a section. If a section is not relevant to them, they don't have to include it. And so that's the core of what the tool is. I guess I'm open for questions.
Cool. Yeah. It'd be interesting. So I think it's super interesting. How has this been already available?
Right. So it's been up and running for a while. I call it basically it's like a public beta. So I've had it up and running. In terms of like some stats, roughly 90 different countries and 3,600 different users.
9, you said?
92 different countries, and with the predominance of English-speaking countries. So I guess one of the other things to talk about is So there's two parts to this. One is it's been drafted trying to be sure I'm compliant with Islamic legal rules on marriage, but at the same time drafted within sort of American and common law, Western common law generally regarding contracting and marriage. And so some of the things I avoid specifically in the agreement are issues of higher contention. For example, the marital estate. So I don't really address the marital estate in detail in this agreement. So if you wanted to sort of do a traditional prenuptial agreement that allocated the marital estate upon divorce, this agreement would not help you do that. And you should, get a lawyer in your jurisdiction to do that.
Have you given some thought to kind of monitoring compliance with the agreement, sort of into the marriage? Or?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. So the one is the idea of penalty clauses, which people actually comes up quite often. Is like what if someone doesn't do it, right? Like what is okay? Do I get a penalty? There's been some case law on the idea that penalties are against social policy of encouraging marriages. You can't have penalty clauses like this in a family context. And more broadly, I also think, like many typical contracts, what happens is a party defaults, right? You reach out to the other party, ask them to cure the default. If they refuse to cure the default, then what's your remedy? You go to court, or you live with the default. And so similarly in a marriage context, that's also what happens, is that you have these parties who come to an agreement. If someone is in violation of it, they also have the right to request the person to cure it. They can maybe involve other family members, maybe the community more broadly in saying this person is in violation of these promises he made to me. And if for whatever reason that is not sufficient, then you have the decision to make of whether you want to live with the default or you want to go towards court, right? And the outcome of the court would be a divorce, and you end the agreement. And so So I have given some thought to it, and I think that staying within that framework makes most sense in terms of a real life sort of application of how people live their lives and deal with these type of issues.
So I'm always interested in the Abrahamic traditions that seem to be in parallel. So the Jewish tradition is to sign a ketubah. Yep. And the ketubah parallels a little bit of this, not nearly. Not as much. The Jewish divorce laws are fairly easy. The difference that I'm hearing so far is that there's a Jewish court called a Bet Din, and the Bet Din is the one who has jurisdiction over the ketubah. Yep. Right. In New York State, and I can say with some authority here, as a New York lawyer and a survivor of the process. Barely. The judges order a Jewish couple to go through the Bet Din ceremony. Okay. And it's pretty much a formality. So it's pretty much a show. Yep. And I just wonder, in the Islamic faith, is there a separate court system distinct from the civil court system through which enforcement is encouraged?
So that's where it gets messy, right? And I sort of addressed this in the agreement itself, and the short answer is there's not, and part of it's there's not overarching authority that can act as a court system, but there are a number of private courts or private sort of arbitration type groups that will do this for you and help you with that process. It also gets complicated because there's different views of thoughts. And one view of thought is if you go through a civil divorce, you've effectively also gotten an Islamic divorce. So people.
How does the jurisdiction clause of this agreement read?
Sure.
What does it say?
So the jurisdiction clause.
Where enforcement would be brought? How does it?
So I'd have it up here on the website. It's actually jurisdiction. So there's a couple of different. So one is I offer it up where the marital home occurs, right? So I don't actually divide it out between a civil court or religious court, because most countries there's not a distinction, right? So it's the family court that has jurisdiction. So in some countries that family court is a religious court. And so whether it's a Sharia law specific court that deals with family law, or it's a civil court that deals with family law. There's not necessarily a distinction between a civil family court and a religious family court in most countries. And so I think if that's how that would play out in this context, because there's not really the Islamic equivalent of the Jewish riba.
Because I think the point in both of our traditions of this was to protect the woman and the children from being abandoned, and so that she actually, when she is cast out in ancient tradition, holds on to this document and says, I'm entitled to whatever. And so, somebody's got to enforce this thing.
Well, and you raise an interesting point, because I think, based on, responses from the, the user base and people I've talked to, women are much more enthusiastic than men are about this.
I'm sure.
Right? There is a gender difference.
I'm sure there is.
About like interest in this and like how people think about it, because and often when there's not a neutral framework or space to do with this, sort of the normative view tends to make it difficult for women to then later try to assert new, maybe not new rights, but new claims that had not been agreed upon earlier.
And I don't know if you've checked out the State Department's child support stuff here.
Not in detail, but
You're probably right.
I'm big.
Do you have any focus on and beta form either in the Arabic language or in Persian or in any of the 26, 27 languages that are officially Arabic, or the one country that's officially Persian?
So I don't. Part of it is I'm not a lawyer in those places, so it's not as easy for me to do that. But another part of that is there's less demand, and partly because the traditions are more developed, that it's more common to do so in those places already, and they already have their own mechanisms for doing so, where I think the demand for this particular service occurs in places where there is a dysfunction or a mismatch between sort of Islamic marriage concepts and family law structures, where there's a lot more interest in thinking about this.
How would the internet in those 26, 27 countries or Iran open a similar disruption, offering you a business opportunity in those languages where the internet opens,
No, so quite frankly, that's very much on the list to do, right? Is the next easy maneuver is to then convert to Arabic. There's a lot more. So when I talk about there not being an overarching authority in the Islamic world for family law stuff, that tends to change in these countries, right? There is an overarching authority. It's the state family law court system, and there already is a case of law. And so localization would require a little bit more effort in terms of making sure that not only is it generally applicable, but then I'm also building terms that are useful for that country within that legal framework.
Wonderful. Unfortunately, we have to close it here. It's a super interesting conversation, and it's very interesting, this service. I mean, it seems like it has a lot of usefulness for people who are entering marriage. And so yeah, please keep us posted.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you all for coming. 3 great presentations today. Next week we have no group meeting, but we have our speaker event, and we have Susan.
Yeah, so it's going to be Jeff Ward, who's the director at Duke Center on Law and Technology and associate professor of law at Duke, and he's going to talk about generative adversarial networks in the next stage of tech regulation. So should be very interesting. And then we are on hiatus after that until December 6th, which is when our next CodeX meeting is, so always stay tuned for the announcement from Roland.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you, America.
Great.
Conference?